What's going on, everybody? Jack here with another episode of The Big and Bold. And today I'm discussing the Michigan football offense. What's going to happen is I'm going to go through the five main offensive positional groups: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and offensive line. I'm going to give you a breakdown of the starters, some of the backups, and I'm going to give you a letter grade for each positional group. Take those with a grain of salt. Your opinion is just as valid as my opinion, but I'm going to give you my rundown of the offense, and I'm going to give them a nice letter grade at the end of the video for the offense as a whole. So thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. And let's dive into my breakdown of the offense as we get an idea of what the Wolverines' offense is going to be in 2022. And there's going to be some differences for the amount of returning production they have on offense, taking into account that you've got a new co-offensive coordinator, couple of big pieces from last year are being replaced. So let's start with the most important position on the field, which is, of course, quarterback. Now, of course, what matters the most here is the J.J. McCarthy, Cade McNamara debate for who should be the starter this upcoming season. And your definition of who should the starter be kind of depends on what you value most. I think the majority of people can agree that J.J. McCarthy gives them the best chance to win. He's the more talented quarterback between the two. He flashed that last season. He was a 5-star coming out of high school. And when he was on the field, the offense just moved better than when Cade was on the field. They just had a different game plan. They played two different kinds of ball. I don't think there's anything Cade can do better than J.J. McCarthy. But I have a breakdown of that quarterback battle that I'll link in the description below if you'd like to check that out. With that said, Cade was the guy for them last year when they went on that 12-2 run, beating Ohio State, winning a Big Ten title. And that matters. He's a fairly efficient quarterback, completed 210 out of 327 passes for 2,500 yards, 15 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. That's not exactly awe-inspiring, right? But it does get the job done. And it got the job done last year when they were running the football incredibly well and playing incredible defense. Cade only ranked 79th nationally for passes of 10 yards or more down the field, which is not particularly good. He was a little hot and cold, a little on and off with his accuracy. Every now and then, you'd see a really nice ball. He can get it through tight windows, have a nice pass down the field. But then every now and then, you'd see poor ball placement, poor vision down the field, inability to make those quick decisions. And he's not great with his legs. J.J. McCarthy has a phenomenal arm, great ability to make plays with his legs. You could see it if you watch the games last year. It's not that hard to tell that there's a talent disparity between the two. But that doesn't mean that Michigan can't win with Cade, as we saw last year. I just believe that it had a lot to do with the run game and the defense. And when things are going well, Cade is a really good quarterback to have. But as we saw last year, when things are not going well, there's more to be desired. We saw that in their loss to Michigan State when they played one of the worst secondaries in college football. He couldn't close there at the end and threw a pick to end the game. Had multiple drives in the fourth quarter to try and take a lead in that game. Couldn't quite pull it off. Against Georgia, it's the best defense in college football. It was the best team in college football. But he did struggle mightily against Georgia, and you could tell that JJ just had a better grasp of things, despite the fact that he was put in at random last season, which it's really hard for a quarterback to come in, especially as an 18-year-old freshman, and develop a flow. But with that said, no matter how you look at it, Cade gives you a floor, and JJ gives you a ceiling. And I don't think JJ exactly has a low floor or anything. If you extrapolate his stats out over the course of the season, if he had as many snaps as Cade, their stats would have been similar. In fact, JJ would have probably had better stats. But it doesn't work that way, right? Regardless, you do have a floor with Cade having started 14 games last year, a couple games the year before in 2020. And what's probably going to happen is he's going to start the season at quarterback, and then over the course of the year, if he struggles, they're going to make the switch to JJ. I don't like the flipping between quarterbacks because it's really hard on the offense with calling plays and signals and things like that. But don't be shocked if they do it again. I doubt that Harbaugh's going to rip the Band-Aid off and roll out JJ. He says he's going to start the best player is going to be on the field, but he's pretty loyal to his quarterbacks as well. We've seen him pull the trigger, like in San Francisco, replacing Alex Smith with Colin Kaepernick, but it's really hard to uproot a guy who went 12-2 last year at quarterback. But that's not our decision to make. That's Jim Harbaugh's. So for the quarterback position, I'm going to be a little more harsh. I'm going to give him a B. Cade ranks out as a middle-of-the-pack quarterback in the Big Ten. JJ has a ridiculously high ceiling, but he hasn't started a game yet in his career. So the best I can do is a B. Feel free to disagree. But like I said, Cade didn't grade out as a particularly good quarterback last year. Not a particularly bad one, just not a particularly good one either. So with that, I then factor in JJ's ceiling. Let's move over to running back. I think everybody knows running back is a fantastic position group. You bring back Blake Corum, who had 952 yards and 11 touchdowns last year on only 143 carries. And the important thing to remember with that is that he got injured with a high ankle sprain towards the end of the year. So their last 4 games of the season, he had very limited work. But Blake Corum, highly coveted prospect coming out of Maryland, 4-star running back, phenomenal playmaker. One of the fastest guys on the field, stocky, shorter back, phenomenal hands. You get the ball in his hands in space, you give him an open lane to run, he's going to be gone and take it to the house. I mean, he can pull 40, 50, 60-yard runs out of nowhere. As the year went on and they played better competition, it got a little harder to do. And then, like I said, he suffered the high ankle sprain. But the fact that Hassan Haskins and his 1,300 yards and 20 rushing touchdowns walk out the door to the Tennessee Titans, but I'm still very confident in this positional group, is partially because of Blake Corum and the fact that he would have been a 1,000-yard rusher and scored even more touchdowns last year had he not suffered the high ankle sprain. But you also have Donovan Edwards. Donovan Edwards was a top 50 player coming out of the state of Michigan, borderline 5-star running back. He kind of jumped between the second, third ranked running back in the class. And the funny thing about Donovan Edwards is he's in this 3-down running back body, 6 feet tall, 205 pounds, something around that. But he's got the skill set for wide receiver. When we saw that when he caught 10 passes against Maryland. And it was really hard for him to get on the field when you have Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum. But he started working his way in there more, and you have a phenomenal 1-2 punch there at running back. Probably the best running back room in the Big Ten, as a matter of fact. The only thing I'll say is that you're replacing that thumper in Hassan Haskins, that guy who he literally didn't have a tackle go for negative yardage, a run go for negative yardage last season. He always fell forward. He always broke through tackles. He was there in between the tackles kind of guy. You replace him with a dynamic, smaller, stockier running back in Blake Corum, who is fantastic in space. You get him out wide, you get the ball in his hands. You run him outside the tackles. And then Donovan Edwards, who's a little unproven, phenomenal wide receiver. You can line him up in the slot. You can move him down the field as a receiving threat. And he's a powerful runner because he's got a good frame. He's got a good size. But he's not exactly the thumper that Hassan Haskins was. So in goal line and short yardage, that could probably be split between the two. And they're going to be used as receivers in different ways. And they're probably going to be on the field at the same time because you can really trick a defense, having to watch out for both of those threats. So phenomenal pairing of running backs. I'm going to give them an A-. They've got a couple of young guys behind them who just provide nice depth, but that's really what you worry about here is Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, great running back duo. Even with Hassan Haskins out the door, they're going to be just fine. Again, I'm a little worried about the fact that they don't have that true thumper that they used so often last year, but I have a feeling they're going to be able to compensate for that, and they're going to use these two to the best of their abilities. So I love their running back room this season. Moving on over to wide receiver, this is another fun one to discuss as well because they have a lot of options. They're like 5 deep at wide receiver, at least. They could use any configuration of 5, 6, or 7 wide receivers on this roster, and I'd be pretty comfortable. Of course, your starting 2 are going to be Ronnie Bell and Cornelius Johnson. Ronnie Bell was their leading wide receiver in 2019 and 2020, and started the season off strong with a 76-yard reception against Western Michigan to start the year before an ACL injury sidelined him there. So he missed effectively all of last season. He's back as a starting receiver. He's been with the program a long time. He's been with the program since 2018. Only a two-star, 3-star recruit coming out of high school. But he's a good, lengthy possession receiver. He runs good routes. He's got good hands. Very reliable target for them. And he's been around the block. He's a fantastic leader for this team. You love to see Ronnie Bell coming back. He's not going to get a whole lot of love from like the NFL draft circle, and he might not be like a consensus All-American or something, but he's a really good wide receiver. And then you have Cornelius Johnson, who stepped up last year in Ronnie Bell's absence. And he turned into their number one wide receiver with 620 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. He's a bigger bodied guy, about 6'3", 215 pounds. Kind of reminds me of Nico Collins. Very good wide receiver there. So with those two that you can move around and primarily play out of the perimeter, Ronnie Bell can come in as a slot. You've got a really nice set of wide receivers there. What gets interesting is everybody else. You've got a trio of speedsters that they use differently. A.J. Henning, Andrel Anthony, and Roman Wilson. Andrel Anthony blew up in a couple of games last year, especially against Michigan State. 3-star out of the state of Michigan. Very quick, lengthy receiver. Roman Wilson, 4-star, very speedy receiver. A.J. Henning, he was their top recruit out of the state of Illinois in the 2020 class. 4-star there. They used him mostly running the ball. They liked using him on jet sweeps last season. He's going to get worked in more, hopefully as a receiver out of the slot. But you've got 3 speedsters there that, A.J. Henning last season used a lot on the ground to run the ball. And then Roman Wilson they liked on the perimeter with his deep threat speed, down the sideline. And then Andrel Anthony they liked, they could hurt you in the middle of the field with him and his speed. So you have these weapons that you can use on the field in multiple different ways. Kind of like with running back, right? So they have some phenomenal pass catchers, and then a couple really talented freshmen coming in as well, like Darius Clemens and Tyler Morris. The only thing I'll say about wide receiver is that they don't really have that one guy who we're like, man, that guy is the guy. He's a dog. He's a stud. Ronnie Bell has not been dominant in his career, but he's been consistent. Cornelius Johnson was very good with limited passing availability last season, but again, not like a dominant threat. And then you got kind of everybody else who they'll use in different ways. So it's really interesting to see how they're going to use these wide receivers this upcoming season because they all can do different things. You've got some guys with similar skill sets that they'll employ in different ways. And so what I'm hoping they do this upcoming season is that they use these wide receivers in a way that best suits them to maximize their ability and to best benefit the offense. Like I said, they're probably 5 deep at wide receiver. I'm comfortable with their top 5 guys. Any configuration on the field with those 5 wide receivers, and I'm happy. So very deep at wide receiver. I'm hoping that someone steps forward as a true number 1, but regardless of that, I give wide receiver a B+. They don't have exactly a Garrett Wilson type of talent like for Ohio State last season or Jackson Smith and Njigba this upcoming season, but they've still got a nice collection of wide receivers. Probably the second best wide receiver room in the Big Ten behind Ohio State. Moving on to tight end, I won't spend too much time here. Eric All, leading receiver for them at tight end last season, 437 yards and 2 touchdowns. Very athletic guy. He couldn't catch a cold in 2020. I could not stand him being on the field. But then in 2021, he really redeemed himself and proved to be an athletic, blocking, receiving tight end. So really like Eric All. I'm really glad he came back, and he's going to try to improve his draft stock this season and become one of the higher selected tight ends in the draft. And then Luke Schoonmaker, another returning tight end, not really used much as a receiver. He only had 165 yards, but he had 3 receiving touchdowns last season. He's a very willing blocker, veteran player, been with the team since 2018, so you like that he came back as well for when they want to use those 2 tight end sets and when they want to use their tight ends as blockers. So tight end gets a B. I don't think Eric All is like one of the best tight ends in the country, but it's definitely a deep unit. They've got some really talented young guys behind them. So I like what they have at tight end. And then, of course, their offensive line. I'll be up front. Their offensive line gets an A. They've got probably the best offensive line in the Big Ten, maybe one of the best in the country. They won the Joe Moore Award last year for best offensive line in the country, and I think they could do it again. You replace Andrew Vastardis at center. He had been with the program, I think, about 5 years. Last year was his 5th year. He graduated, has moved on. He was a nice, reliable piece at the middle. And then Andrew Stuber, he got drafted out of right tackle. But they've probably upgraded at both of those positions. Oluwatimi, transfer from Virginia, comes in at center. He was a Remington Trophy Award finalist, which is given to the country's best center. So he was a finalist for that award. So he's probably an upgraded center. He's a dog. People have already been raving about him so far in the offseason at Michigan. And then a bit of a competition at right tackle. But Trent Jones, former four-star from Georgia, he'll probably take over as the starting right tackle. And then, of course, you have Ryan Hayes, who played lights out for them last year. Zach Sinter has been described as possibly their best player per Jim Harbaugh. He played really, really well for them. Fantastic run blocker at guard. Injuries held him back a little bit, but he's back and healthy. And down the stretch, he played lights out. And he could be a very early draft pick for Michigan after this upcoming season. And then you have Trevor Keegan taking over the other guard spot as well, who played really well last season. So Michigan's got a phenomenal offensive line. It's an A. They've got the best, I'd say, offensive line in the Big Ten. I believe Phil Steele's ranking has them as the number one offensive line in the country. So, and then they've got some talented depth guys behind them too. Maybe not a whole lot of playing time, but talented depth behind them. So, with that said, that overall is the Michigan offense in my letter grades. Just to kind of simplify how I feel about it, overall I'd give them a B+ on offense. I understand that some people probably think they should be ranked a little higher, but we've got to see a little bit more before I get there, right? We haven't seen a Michigan quarterback throw for 4,000 yards and 30 passing touchdowns. I think that if J.J. McCarthy were to start the season, I believe that he could hit those marks. You've got 2 phenomenal pass-catching running backs, 5 wide receivers that you can move around as different tools on your offense at receiving core. You're 2 deep at tight end. You got the best offensive line in the Big Ten. This is the best offense that Harbaugh's had since he came to Michigan. I think that they can throw the ball more. I think they should throw the ball more, even if Cade is the starter. And you got an offensive line to protect you in the pocket. So this is going to come down to replacing Josh Gaddis at offensive coordinator for me, because they've got all the talent. But is Matt Weiss, co-offensive coordinator with Sherrone Moore, going to be able to take all this talent and use it properly? Use their running backs properly, use all their wide receivers properly, handle whoever the starting quarterback is the right way? That, to me, is the real question. And we'll see. We'll see. They've got a pretty light start to the year in terms of their schedule to work things out. I'm going to have a schedule breakdown as well. I'm going to have a defensive breakdown, so keep an eye out for that video if you liked this one. Main takeaway here is depth. The offense is incredibly deep across probably every position, at least 2 deep at every position. And so that is like a quality you need to have to be a competitive team in college football, because at any moment, a guy could step out and it's next man up. So the fact that they're incredibly deep on offense is a big deal. A few guys are going to have to step up, I think, for them to really play as one of the best offenses in college football. But again, overall letter grade, I give them a B+. And I think that regardless of what you believe their letter grade should or shouldn't be, they're the second best offense in the Big Ten heading into this season. With that said, thank you for listening, everybody. Please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video. And keep an eye out in the future, like I said, for a defensive preview and a schedule breakdown for the Wolverines. So go Blue, and thank you for listening.